One of my favorite things to eat, cook, especially with meat, mushrooms. This is a hen of the wood mushroom. At my restaurant Craft in New York, we probably go through, I don't know, 300, 400 pounds a week of hen of the wood mushrooms. It's one of our most popular sides, and for good reason. This mushrooms have a ton of flavor. These are farm raised, but there are wild versions as well. So I'm gonna cut these up, and I'm gonna leave them pretty big. I don't wanna chop these up really fine. And so you see there's a large core in the center here, but that's all edible, so we're just gonna cut through that and just kind of make segments of the mushroom. So we'll start off again, medium flame. Oil, this is avocado oil. My wife's on an avocado oil cook, so it's in the house, and that's what I'm gonna use. You can use olive oil. In fact, I'll probably finish with a little olive oil and some butter later on, but just to get it going. Now, this is what's really important when you cook mushrooms. And I'm sure you've seen this before, where you've taken your mushrooms, you've sliced them, cut them, wedged them, whatever, you put them in the pan, and all of a sudden you have a puddle in the bottom of the pan. Now the reason that's happening is because mushrooms are about 85–90% water. And if you overcrowd the pan, the temperature drops too much. Also, if you don't allow for surface area for the water to accumulate and then to evaporate off, the water will just start to collect. And when that happens, you start steaming your mushrooms and they turn to mush. So, real important, allow some space between the mushrooms, don't overcrowd the pan. So we'll cook these in batches. And put this guy in here. So you see, mushrooms are in the pan, not too hot, but definitely hot enough where it's sizzling. But you notice that there's surface area between each one. All right, there's a little area. So as the water starts to come out, that's when you see the steam coming out, it's exactly what's happened. The water is coming out of the mushroom, it's hitting the hot pan, it starts to steam, and the steam is released. We could probably put one in the center there too. These mushrooms, again, also because I kept them whole, they're dense, and hen of the wood mushrooms are a little on the dense side as well. So, and you'll see that they're brown. And now, same thing I've been doing before, when the pan gets a little too hot, you don't want them to burn, so we're gonna lower this way down. And these are gonna have to be turned a couple times. We're gonna cook these, again, nice and gently. Also, we're using a black steel pan, so it holds the heat really, really well. I'm not tossing these because you don't want to break them up. Flames aren't shooting out the side of the pan. We take our time. Again, if you cook these on high heat, the outside would cook before the inside would cook, and they would get all burnt on the outside. You really want to take it. I'm going to cut this one down a little bit. This one's a little on the large side. There we go. That's all. A little salt. You can always salt and pepper as you go. So for this recipe, I'm just going to roast the mushrooms, finish them in a little bit of butter, salt and pepper, and I have some fresh herbs that I'll chop up and add to the pan as well. That's it. Now, but if I wanted to do something like marinate mushrooms or mushrooms a la grecque, we do this a lot as well in the restaurant, I would eliminate the butter, saute the mushrooms in batches, put them off to the side, and then make a vinaigrette, olive oil, vinegar, some herbs, and sometimes we actually dice carrot, celery, onion, leek really, really fine and sweat that first. Add the oil, vinegar, let that cool down, and then add that to the mushrooms over the top to marinate them. So, but you still have to do this step first. This is the important step. Now you also notice that the pan's starting to get very dry. I don't see any oil because it's starting to soak up the oil. We're going to add more. There we go. But again, you see all the time, you're getting a sizzle in the pan. The mushroom is going to brown. And you don't want to overhandle these. I mean, quite frankly, I should be using a spoon instead of a pair of tongs. You don't want them to break up. Here's some garlic. Not a lot of garlic. It's going to add a little bit of garlic to this. One clove is fine. And then I have some tarragon and some chervil. Again, parsley, not too much tarragon, it's really pungent. Like the stems, I don't want those. And that's it. I don't want it too fine. So this is enough for, 2 people, 3 people, maybe 4, depending on how many you want. If I were going to do more, I would do this in batches. I would take the mushrooms, put them aside now, add more mushrooms to the pan, and then bring them back together after they've expelled a lot of their water already before I add the butter and the herbs. But at this point, mushrooms are just about there. Again, the pan, looking at the pan, still drying out a little bit. I'll add a little more oil. Now at this point, we're going to start adding some butter. That's about a tablespoon, I guess. And again, real important that this, again, if the pan was too hot, this would just start to burn and brown. I don't want it to burn and brown just yet. You can get that butter going. And again, you see how nicely this is browning without high heat. That's the big cooking myth that I'm trying to dispel, that you need high heat to brown your food. You certainly don't. What's interesting, what I find that when you're cooking, especially when you're cooking, you see the food start to transform. You actually start noticing little things. You notice when it starts to push the water out, and you notice that it's actually, once the water's out of it, it starts to absorb oil. That's why you add oil. I'm adding more oil as I go. It's starting to brown nicely. But you notice that the butter is melting slowly. It's in a pan, but this is still whole, right? And the mushrooms will start absorbing all that butter as well. And again, if you add the garlic too soon, it's going to start to burn, so you don't want to do that. Again, I'm using a blue steel pan. This one is from Made-In. They're a direct-to-consumer pot and pan company. Make really high-quality pots and pans at really good prices because it's direct-to-consumer. They cut out the middleman. But the black steel pans, a lot of home cooks don't use them. We use these in the restaurant pretty much exclusively, especially to roast meat and fish. You got to just treat it a little bit. It's very easy to break in, but you just got to make sure that when you put it away, a light coating of oil so it doesn't rust out on you. But that's it. It actually has the conductivity and holds the heat like cast iron, and it's not nearly as heavy, but it definitely does a great job. Okay, so now we have our butter in. It's all melted. Our mushrooms are starting to brown nicely, starting to absorb all that butter. And then we're going to add our garlic. And then let the garlic cook a little bit. And again, you see the garlic is nicely cooking. It's going to start to brown, but it's not going to get too dark. But garlic burns very, very quickly, and when it burns, it goes from being nice and fragrant and garlicky to bitter very, very quickly. So it's got to be careful when it goes in the pan. And then we have our herbs. We'll add some herbs. I don't need all of these. That's probably enough. Just a stir. And again, if you don't like tarragon, don't use it. I could have used thyme, parsley, sage. Really, any herb will do. And that's pretty much it. They're all cooked through. They're nicely brown. Now, what I do want to do is drain these. That's why I pulled a plate and a paper towel. Drain these a bit. Make sure you scrape up all the herbs that are there. Here we go. And those are our pan-roasted mushrooms. Great accompaniment to all meats. Also fish too. Good roasted fish, but just a delicious mushroom. Mushrooms are my absolute favorite thing to eat, and I think the reason being is that when you're a kid, at some point, summer and after a rain, maybe you find a mud puddle. What do you make? You make mud pies, right? So at some point, you taste that mud pie just because you have to, right? And so it's that dirt. Now, it's kind of gritty and maybe texturally doesn't feel well, but there's something about that earth, something about, out in the country after a rain, you smell the earth. And to me, that is, I think, is captured in a mushroom, especially. You taste dirt in a good way. And I think it's the closest you can get to eating terroir when you eat a mushroom. So one of my favorite things to eat. You know, when I was a kid, my grandfather used to forage for mushrooms. He had a little trick. He would put a penny and a nickel in water and put the mushroom in and boil it. And if either one turned green, they were poisonous. My grandfather's no longer with us, but it wasn't because of the mushrooms. He's passed on years ago. But yeah, so I grew up eating mushrooms. I always found them to be, again, just like the closest thing you can get to eating actual dirt. And so that, and I think the other vegetable that I think gets you there are beets. And I happen to love beets as well. I know some people hate beets and hate mushrooms. Good, more for me. Anyway, simple recipe. Hope there's some good pointers along the way, but a great accompaniment for the roasted meat that we're making today. Cheers.